Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Andrew Hiller.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm also doing great. I am so excited to have you on. For anyone that's listening to this is here is another person. I've had on a few people already from ALA, the American Library Association Conference. And that's how I met Andrew. And we had such an amazing time talking all about his writing and life and all of the creative endeavors he's done. So, can you tell me a bit about yourself?
So, I think the story I usually tell, the shorthand version, is when I was 14, I sold my first painting. And when I was 15, I sold my first poetry. When I went to college, I majored in indecision. And then my first real job, sort of real job, was teaching art in a psychiatric ward. And I did that for a while. And I really seriously considered going into art therapy until the social workers told me that insurance didn't consider art therapy real. So you'd sort of have to invent your world if you ever wanted to make money doing it, if you wanted to make a living salary. And so I said, what can I do that allows me to utilize the art skills, utilize the creative skills, utilize the ability to look at things from an alternate perspective and help people in need? And so I went into special education and I taught middle school children in inclusive environments and self-contained environments. And I did that for a while until my grandmother got really ill. And what happened was she was very osteoporotic. She had very thin bones and she would get fractures all the time. And there was this one time where my grandmother fell and she fractured her shoulder in four places and she very badly damaged her hip and she went to the hospital. And the hospital gave her the wrong medicine. And the medicine resulted in her becoming delusionary. She started hallucinating. She lost her ability even to speak English. She had
So
originally come
sorry.
from Poland. Oh, thank you. And so we had her go from the hospital to the rehab unit, and the rehab unit gave her the attention that many nursing homes do. So within 2 days, she had four more fractures. In which case, we decided that we would move her back into my parents' home and take care of her. So I moved back into my parents' home. And so I could rotate between teaching and writing the IEPs and doing everything that I needed to do and help my parents taking care of her and help her take care of herself and help my mother take care of her. And after about 6 months, I started burning out. And we looked into private care and we discovered that private care would cost somewhere between two and three times more than I was making as a teacher. So I did some soul searching and I said, you know what? I've been trained to work with disabilities. I've been trained a little bit to do fine and gross motor skill stuff. Why don't I quit my job and I'll retrain Baba to be who she used to be? And so I did. And while after that, I got her about 80% back to who she had been.
That is absolutely incredible.
And then comes the decision, what do you do with your life? And I had to ask myself this question. Did I have the energy to be as selfless as I needed to be the teacher that I like to be? And my answer was, I don't know that I do. I don't know that right now I did. So I talked to my friends, and I had one friend who worked for NPR at the national level. And that sounded entirely selfish to me. You know, getting into the opportunity to do what you're doing and enter people's lives, talk to them about things they love, shine a spotlight on good people doing good things or being able to enter the world of the amazing. Sounded
Oh, it's the
entirely,
best job.
isn't it awesome?
It really is.
And so she arranged a meeting with me with Mark McDonald, who at that point was the programming director for WAMU, which is Washington, D.C.'s NPR station. And my pitch was something like this. And I'm probably wasting too much time telling this story, but I'm almost done.
No, no,
Um,
it's this is a podcast about you. So yeah, so you're saying that it's like you were doing this like kind of selfishly and like doing that. This is where we need you to do that. Take up all the space. It's the best.
So I told him, Mark, I've sold the paintings, I've sold some poetry, I've had two of my plays produced in New York. I've worked with senior citizens, I worked with children in education. My graduate school gives me a knowledge of statistics. I've lived in DC, so I know politics. I know everything you cover. I just know nothing about radio. Can you give me a job? And Mark said, well, that's valid. But we got to figure out if you can learn radio. Are you willing to volunteer for a little while? So I went back to my parents and I said, hey, could you spot me for another couple months to see if this is a fit? And they said yes. And then I was given a chance to do something because one of their goals was to see if I could write. And I wrote a little comedic commentary called DC Has No Food. And it was about how DC has no edible identity. We have no Georgia peaches. We have no Virginia ham. We have no baked Alaska. We have no New York style pizza or Chicago style, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Chicago style everything because we're the best food city. Yeah.
There you go. And so somehow that resonated and it wound up getting 5,000 phone calls. And it wound up being selected for their drive show as the best commentary of the year. And so that opened doors for me to do more commentaries. And that opened then doors for me to try my hand at reporting. And eventually that led me to meeting Jane Henson, Jim Henson's widow, which got me into the Muppets. And then we did some of the book things and we did all sorts of other things. And I sometimes think of myself as Captain Almost, but I also think of myself as an incredible lucky person because I got to enter so many worlds and got to meet so many people who are just incredible people. And so that's a little bit about me and how I got to where I am.
That is such an incredible story on every level. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Sure.
So you mentioned that you were already had plays that you'd done and had done all of that, but when did you start writing? Like just in general, were you interested in it when you were younger?
So I think the easiest answer is that I think I started writing when I started breathing. And I think I've always been attracted to storytelling. And so there are kids who immediately gravitated towards kickball or baseball or basketball. I was into the imagination games. Whether
Yeah.
it was being a character from Star Wars or being a superhero or being part of a made up universe with my friends. And I think that's where the love of figuring out problem solving that gets into storytelling began because you had the opportunity to figure out how to make it work and to make it work for everybody. And then to figure out, what creates a laugh. I
Yeah.
mean, one of the stories I tell, or relatively early in my writing career, I had a play called Stripes on the Wall Going 75. It was about an artist who could never sell anything until he got into a car accident and woke up in the regress state of a 5-year old. And once the art world found out that he was legitimately diagnosed, they wanted everything he had ever produced. And so as he recovers, he has to decide, do I want to stay in this state and have everything I ever dreamed of, or become myself again and probably lose it all? But the cool moment was on that opening night, and you've probably had this experience. If you haven't, I hope you do. I'm sitting in the audience hours before the curtain rises, and I see the janitors come in, and I start getting nervous. My heart starts pumping for them because I'm like, their job depends on my play doing well. And then I see the text, I see the audio engineer, and I see the lighting, and I'm getting more nervous and more pale. I'm losing the color. And then finally the actors come in, and I see the stage manager, and I'm a nervous wreck. And I put myself in the back row because I figured stereotypically that's where I belong. And eventually the play begins, and I'm a puddle of goo.
Of course,
And
of
then
course. Yeah.
on the first laugh line, someone laughs and I just melt and all the stress and all the joy starts. And then there's a line and I hear people sighing in the audience. I'm like, oh my God, they're living in my world. And so from that little kid who used to improv plays for his parents or his friends' parents to this collaborative world in which you can create something through editors or through directors or through actors or through artists. You get to inspire, you get to create catharsis, you get to give something which is essential. And I do believe, and I'm sure you do too, art is essential. It
Oh,
is breath.
that is such an amazing story, and I feel like you perfectly did describe that feeling. My background's in theater, and so in acting, mostly for that. So I had that a lot as like a kid being in adult shows going, okay, wait, I don't want to be the kid that sucks in this. And if they go out of this and say that the kid sucked, then what happens to all these other people that are in this play? And where does this go? Like it's that moment and then kind of seeing it come together and be like, wait, okay, everything's fine. And as someone who's produced as well, yes, yes,
And that's also the moment and why I love actors, in which if you see a show or you're in a show every day, you see the micro changes in it as they understand different things within that play, which is why I think the book of a play or the libretto is a slightly different creature than the play itself or the musical itself. It lives differently once it's inhabited. And that's partly the director's vision, it's partly the actor's vision. And sometimes they make you more brilliant than you are. And sometimes it's just different because they understand the world in a different way than you do. And I think that's true actually, even in a prose book. Because I
absolutely.
think when you read those words, the words I read and the words you read are different words. And I think that's the greatest thing about creative materials and the creative process.
There is something very eternal about all of it. I mean, we have books from hundreds of years ago that people are still reading and interpreting and changing because of the way that they read it. Absolutely. So, kind of switching up topics, can you tell me a bit about your children's book?
So, Pitter Patty Finds Another Day is a story I first envisioned when I was 17. And it was an assignment in a high school creative writing class, which I forced into being, which is a whole nother
Mhm.
story.
I would like to
Um,
hear that story once you're done with this story.
okay. So it is a story of a lonely little rain cloud who is trying to find a friend and trying to find a home, but is always being chased away by the meanest song ever written. And I bet you've sung it, and I bet all your listeners have sung it. Rain, Rain, Go Away.
Mm, yes.
And she tries everything she can think of to be liked. So she tries being friendly. She tries smiling. But if you're smiling at someone and you're still raining on them, they run away. So she tries saying, I'm going to study other clouds. And she looks at why people like fluffy white clouds. And she says, oh, they like them because they look like other things. And it excites them. So she starts trying to learn how to do that. She learns how to become a velociraptor and a helicopter and a lion and a marching band. And she says, okay, I've got all these great shapes. I'm going to go out there. But changing yourself doesn't make you likable. So it doesn't work. So then she says, I got it. I'm going to deny who I am. I just won't be a rain cloud. And she holds her breath and she stops raining. And it works for a while. There's no rain. People come out, they play. But the problem is, if you deny yourself too long, you get a tummy ache and then lightning. And then you become really upset and really angry. And so I'm going to begin to head towards the end of the book. She she keeps running and she says, I'll go to places where people like water. And so she goes to the beach, but no one wants rain at the beach. And she keeps going and going. And finally, she winds up in this huge beach. And she's more miserable than ever because obviously there is no place. There is no another day for her. And yet somehow at this beach, people start getting really excited. They start dancing and they start smiling and they start putting out pots because she's found her way to a drought. She's found her way to a desert. And she finally has found a place where she can be loved not only for who she is, but for what she does. And that is the story of Pitter Patty Finds Another Day.
That is so beautiful. I love that so much. I needed that book as a kid. Absolutely.
I
Um,
think I did too, which is probably why it came.
I feel like you perfectly just described the experience of growing up. I don't know if this was the intention for it, but of growing up as someone who is creative and is trying to do that and trying to mold yourself into those boxes and all of that.
I think that's true, and I'm going to be careful about this because I hate speaking into other people's shoes. I have some of these shoes myself. I think it's also a story about anyone who feels like an other. If you don't fit in the box, whether that's because of your religion or your gender or your sexuality or your race or anything, there is a time where you're like, well, I'll make it easy. I'm Jewish, but I'm lucky because Judaism is an invisible minority. So if I don't want people to know I'm Jewish, they generally don't. So I can live in disguise. And that's true of a number of others. It's not true for all others, obviously. But if I really deny what I believe, or I allow people to say things in my presence which are prejudicial or hateful, it really does give me a tummy ache or worse. And, I'm speaking still in children's books terms, but you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. I myself I'm LGBTQ, and so it's completely different. But on some level, I do understand that feeling where it's like, yes, if I didn't want people to know, they wouldn't necessarily. But then how far do you go before you're not true to yourself anymore?
Yeah. And that propulsion to say, oh, I better change myself, or I better hide myself, or maybe I only can be myself in this safe space, and figuring out to what degree that's true. And then hopefully finding a world where you can always be yourself, which,
Absolutely.
which is hard.
Yeah, this sounds like such an important book and such a wonderful book. I'd like to know more about this class though, and how this assignment came about and the way that you interpreted it.
So what happened was I was entering my senior year of high school. And I looked at the catalog of classes I could enroll in. And I had already taken all the art classes available at that high school.
Mm.
And I had taken a number of other things. And I didn't want to take another boring class or a hard class. And I knew that the part of my brain in high school, in my senior year, wasn't going to be there. And I know myself well enough. And I saw in the curriculum a little blurb about a creative writing class, and wasn't being offered. And I thought that's what I'd like. So I talked to an English teacher, and they said, "Yeah, yeah, we've had that. We haven't had it for 10 years, 20 years, but it's there. And if you can find enough people, we can probably find you a teacher for it." And so I first started interviewing teachers, trying to see who would be there and if one of the cool teachers would be willing to sort of incorporate that into their
Mm.
schedule. And once I got one I liked, canvassed my friends, and then I canvassed the drama club, and then I canvassed some juniors or what incoming juniors because I couldn't quite find enough people until I got like, I think it was 16 people who were thinking, we want to write stories all the time.
Oh, that's
And
fantastic.
and the class got realized. Now, I will say that I was a little disappointed at first because my vision of this class was, hey, you're in a creative writing class. Here's a blank canvas, go. And the teachers perspective was no, no, we need a syllabus and we need to do these projects. So the way Pitter Patty came into being was quite literally, the teacher at one point said, we're going to do a section on children's writing and picture books, to which my 17-year-old brain said, oh, no. And then I was like, okay, well, I need a protagonist that isn't your standard protagonist. So I immediately ruled out cats and dogs.
Of course.
And I, I wanted to do something. And I don't remember why a cloud or a rain cloud came into being, but it's probably my inner contrarian, even at that age. The rain cloud, a lot of people don't like rain. I actually do, but a lot of
I
people
love
don't like
rain.
rain. So making the rain the good guy, making the rain the hero of the story, I thought actually could be fun. Why is the villain actually the hero? And so that's how Pitter Patty was born through this class. And back then, of course, Pitter Pat Pitter Patty actually morphed. Pitter
Oh,
Patty was originally called Nimbus because I think all clouds at one point are called Nimbus. And Pitter Patty was a male cloud. And we actually at one point considered, and I'm not sure this should make tape, but I'll bring it up when
okay.
the publisher came to it. Um, we considered making Pitter Patty. Pitter Patty was already she. It was at that point, but we debated on whether Pitter Patty should be a they,
Oh,
because
yeah.
why should a cloud be gendered? And
Makes
what
sense.
would denote a gender for a cloud? And I think we wimped out a little bit just because it was both the publisher's first children's book and my first children's book, and we didn't know if we could handle or figure out the controversy, and we didn't want to close doors before the book was ever open because,
Makes
with a small publisher, it's already very hard to get on the shelf. And the bookstores are scared away by certain things. But
Well, that's exactly why we need some of these bigger companies to start having more representation, because a lot of times the argument back is like, "Oh, well, indie companies do it and smaller companies, but a lot of times they can't because it's a lot harder to get things put in bookshelves and it's expensive and time consuming and dangerous." So I completely understand that. Yeah.
yeah, and the thing is, I'm content with our decision, mainly because the book turned out so beautiful. This is another one of it's back to my theater days. You
Mhm.
love working with a collaborator because they see the world differently than you do. And to see the book realized, when I was a playwright, and I was never a hugely successful playwright, but I've had some plays done, people started asking me, do you want to direct your own stuff? And I was always like, no, no, I would be too certain of what I want. And I would deny the actors the freedom to discover the play. I would force things into my vision. And by having an artist with the children's book or having someone else direct it, it opens up the world in really special ways. So I'm really glad that happened. And we were able to, through the book, and I think you've seen it, at least address diversity through the illustrations, which was an important thing for us.
That is fantastic. Yeah, actually, can we talk a little bit more about the illustrations in this book and how you found your illustrator and how that whole process worked?
So I didn't find the illustrator, the publisher did.
Okay.
And what the publisher did was she sent me a link to their online portfolio to see if I thought that their style would sort of jibe with my vision. So, do a little projection. And I saw it and I thought it was really cute and I thought it was fun. I was like, okay, let's do this. And then she produced a series of thumbnail sketches. And at that point, I wrote notes on every single sketch. And sometimes the notes were, this is fantastic. Don't change anything.
Mm.
And sometimes the notes were, oh, wait a minute. Is this coming across? Because I really want this coming across with this set of words? And could we swap out this image for something else? And when we had our discussion, the discussion was with myself, the publisher, the art director, and the illustrator. Sometimes I won, and sometimes I lost. And sometimes when I lost, I would say usually when I lost, it was the right decision for me to lose. And sometimes when I won, uh, they were excited about the reason why I wanted a difference. Because it's not about ownership. It's not about, oh, it's got to be what I want. It's got to be what's going to serve the material best. What's going to get across the image that we want to. I also did try to do the inverse. I tried to say to the illustrator and to the publisher, I said, hey, look, now that we have illustrations, which words aren't necessary? Because sometimes your words are told by the picture. It's the thousand words thing. And so the illustrations got to affect it. Change happens in both directions. That's when, that's what I hope for in a collaboration.
That I was about to say, that's like the best part of collaboration, when you're having that where you can kind of bounce off of each other. That sounds so wonderful. Now you also have fantasy books. How did you start writing those and get into that? I feel
So
like you've lived a million lives is what we're taking away from this interview,
many
really.
hats. But so I blame my grandmother for my getting into fantasy books because when I was really young, I would say six, seven, eight, getting into reading in a more serious way, my grandmother banned comic books. She absolutely refused to let them in the house, and she thought they were the most corruptive, most terrible thing in the universe. And I've always been, unfortunately or fortunately, a good kid, but I needed to rebel on this. And so the way I decided to rebel was I got really into mythology, which I decided was the story of superheroes. They were magically superpowered people doing amazing adventures to save the day or make trouble. And so that got me into fantasy. And then I got into more legitimate fantasy, probably through Anne McCaffrey and Charles DeLint and several other authors whom to this day I truly love. And I love them so much that sometimes I fear to reread them because I worry that their work is dated and won't be as good as I remember.
Oh, I understand
But
that. Yeah.
but they at that time and where I was in my life, they were perfect and amazing authors. And they gave me the permission to be creative, to do things that were impossible. And that's, I think, why I love fantasy. I also love it because, sort of like the children's books, it allows you to deal with analogy. It allows you to take on a serious issue in a non-confrontational way. This goes to a Druism, something I say a lot, which is I have always believed that the sign of good art is that when the curtain falls, the conversation starts. And so if you write something that has meaning, or if you draw something, or you paint something, you act something, what you want to hear is you want to hear the murmur from the audience afterwards. You want to hear them debating it, whether they love it or they hate it, or they're confused by it. You want to have that reaction. And that's, why I do the thing that you should never do as an author. I read the reviews because in prose, you don't get to hear the audience laugh or sigh or scream. And you don't get to sort of spy in the back in the oh gosh, I lost the word. The- when the audience leaves the theater and they're milling in the lobby. And you don't
Oh,
get to, when they go into the lobby, you don't get to sort of spy on them and overhear what people are saying because you're anonymous as a writer, which is the great thing about being a playwright. An actor
mm.
can't actually do that kind of spying.
You start to spy, and then they turn and go, "Oh, you were so good." And you're like, "No, I wasn't. I heard the rest of your conversation." Like,
Which I'm sure has only happened to some of your peers, but not you.
Never
But
me. Not
that's
not yet.
yeah.
Just because my hearing isn't that good. But yeah,
But so yeah, no, I love that interchange in all its forms.
I absolutely get that. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been an absolutely incredible conversation. We're running out of time now, but I can't believe we didn't even talk about the Muppets, which I've been nerding over, of course.
Can come back.
Yes, I just have one more question, and that's what do
Okay.
you have coming up?
So, in terms of events, this weekend I'm going to something called Fawn Fest. In 2019, a group called the Baltimore Ferry Fair selected me as their author of the year. And I
Oh,
went
cool.
to this event not knowing what they were, and they wound up giving me as my award the key to the fairy kingdom, which actually turned out not only to be the key to the fairy kingdom, but a nice bottle opener. So it
Amazing.
was, yeah. But they were really cool, really fun people. And I haven't seen almost any of them since the pandemic. And they're having this sort of a one day mini Renaissance Fairy Festival
Oh, cool.
in the woods. And so I'm going to go down there and I'm going to talk stories with everyone who shows up. And then I'm going to be doing a few more shows in September. And I'm deep in the edits of something amazing, which hopefully the next time we talk will be closer to fruition.
That sounds very exciting. Please come on again. I'd love to talk about that new project. Um, yeah. Thank you again. This was wonderful. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Andrew Hiller.
And this
Thank you.
is the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The end. Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.